Hello. Yes, indeed, I think the topic that I'm allowed to give an impulse to is worth lots of discussions, I would say. And here it is. May I read? The eternal work of art, how much future does electronic music need? And should we worry about technology obsolescence? That's
easy to read, isn't it?
totally.
Obsolescence.
Yeah, I mean, once you've written it down, it's... Yeah. All right, I'm really going to try to basically find out or maybe tidy up the whole this whole term and slice it in nice pieces for discussing it. But as well, of course, it's always nice to have some audio in the beginning, usually. So I'll just throw in a little bit of audio that I will explain later and that many people will, of course, already know.
Musiktheoretische Grundbegriffe der elektronischen Musik sind der Ton, der Klang, das Tongemisch, das Geräusch und der Zusammenklang. Ich wiederhole, der Ton, der Klang, das Tongemisch, das Geräusch und der Zusammenklang. Der Zusammenklang ist identisch mit dem neueren akustischen Begriff Klanggemisch.
Oops, sorry. It was meant to continue. Right, here we go. Okay, I will put this into our context a little bit later. I just wanted to have another little impulse for now. And maybe now I will have a look at what are the actual, like the hot terms in this big question. So maybe something like this. We see the eternal work of art. We see future and electronic music. We see electronic music technology. We see obsolescence. And maybe the most striking bit of it is like this bracket of the whole thing of eternity or the eternal and the obsolescence. It's pretty clear that there's a huge contrast in between these two notions, of course. And I think it's worth considering this when we put these other terms in between those two. And yeah, of course, I think the notions are clear. Obsolescence is, if you will, I would say a crucial feature of technology in some ways. And it maybe this should also be part of our discussion, may become even more so, even more crazier obsolescence features are coming into our technology, maybe. But another thing that is pretty striking, as I just said, is this pairing of electronic music, which is one of our central topics in these days here, as being linked with future and being linked with technology. Both of these links are more or less evident, but maybe we should discuss this, or maybe let's have a look at it. I was considering where the link of the notion of future and electronic music could be tracked down and of course I'm not gonna do an in-depth review of anything possible, but I found something that is is a very nice example of this, or a very interesting example. It's a text called Das Problem der kommenden Musik, the problem of the music to come, maybe, by Robert Bayer. And an interesting point is that it was written in 1928, so probably before what we probably basically understand under the notion of electronic music had actually started to exist. And the interesting thing is that Bayer pens down his visions of what the music to come would or should be like. It was published in a magazine called Die Musik in 1928. And I'll just have a few samples from the text that we just have a brief look at. I will just roughly translate in English. Please allow me to read some of the sentences in German, and I will just translate the things that I would think are crucial. Wir nennen das Neue, welches teilweise mit der Gewalt einer Naturkraft in den Interessenkreis des Schaffenden eindringt, ihn vor ganz neu geartete Aufgaben stellt, denen er sich kaum verschließen kann, deren Lösung und Realisierung heute dringend versucht wird und meinen mechanische Musik, elektrische Tonerzeugung, Klangfarbenmusik, Farblicht, Film- und Rundfunkmusik. So Bayer connects this envisioned sphere of artistic artist practice to technologies, actually, to mechanical music, to electronic sound generation, danke, music of timbre, colored light music, film music, broadcasting music, or broadcast music, whatever. I'll just go on. There's a couple of more examples. He quotes, I think it's quite interesting, another range of technologies that he sees as carrying the potential to be transformed or to be used for a new way of practice. Wir denken einmal an die Versuche, welche vermittels elektrischer Schaltungen und Verstärkerröhre akustische Erscheinungen herstellen, wie an die Möglichkeiten einer Klangfarbenkonstruktion auf dem Wege der Analyse oder Synthese und optischer Methoden, zum anderen an die Aufnahme- und Vermittlungsverfahren des Grammophons, der magnetischen Stahlseite, des Rundfunks und tönenden Films überhaupt. Maschinen, die es möglich machen, die Stimme vom Leibe zu trennen und über die Fernen zu tragen, Klänge rückläufig erscheinen zu lassen, ein Klangfarbenreich von fast kosmischer Weite zu durchlaufen, 100 andere Dinge zu tun, Maschinen, die mächtig sind durch die Form, die eigenartige Beherrschung der Naturgesetzlichkeit, eine neue Zielsetzung, deren Wunder zutiefst in den Geheimnissen der Wissenschaft verborgen liegt. Okay, in the end, the whole thing, Bayer kind of transcends his dimensions of fantasy. He quotes like the cosmic dimensions of the potential. But he refers again to technologies like the link of technologies of analysis to technologies of synthesis, like the construction of timbre, also with optical methods, and talking about sound recording technologies. Also the magnetic steel string, which is, I would guess, the wire recorder rather than anything else, probably. And again, connects this sphere to broadcasting and film, like this media spheres. And another quote that I found interesting, because he clearly refers to electronic sound generation. Wir sehen den Sinn der elektrischen Tonerzeugung darin, dass hier die Möglichkeit gegeben ist, einen Klang zu realisieren, der bisher ohne klingenden Raum bleiben musste, solange seine Erzeugung nur aus dem Körper des Menschen und den Dimensionen seiner Beweglichkeit geschehen konnte. This is a point that was also in the previous quotation. So this idea of potentially using electronic sound generation transcending the limits that are being imposed by imposed on sound generation that is connected to body movement, or even like body function, like human voice. This is also interesting when you think about electronic sound generation as it was done in those days, which was rather constructing instruments with a specific playing interface, but behaving rather like classical instruments as you would have known them from the centuries before. And just one last example. Die Mächtigkeit und das Wunder eines fernen Klanges wird erträumt und erwartet seine Wirklichkeit unter uns. Yeah, I'm sorry, I had to include this one. It's just a nice quote that shows us that he must have been very much looking forward to what was going to happen. Okay, so here we have an example of, or like even in a moment where electronic music was still the future, we have a couple of features that are being attached to it, and maybe, I'm not quite sure, that is something I would think we should discuss. Maybe there is this kind of like futuristic DNA within electronic music, or is there? But there seems to be this, for me there is this notion of future, or like of a future perspective that is kind of a mission statement for electronic music. And this text, I would say, is a very strong example for that. So that should be discussed, I think. But I think there's also probably there's one more aspect of a link between electronic music and future that is encapsulated in this other connection in between electronic music and technology. Remembering that technology has probably this kind of obligatory link to obsolescence, there is some aspect of future imposed on the practice of working in the how do you say, in this technological medium that electronic music is usually incorporated in. So another example, this time it's a photograph, and probably some will know where this was taken. So maybe this is the moment to go back to the little snippet we listened to in the beginning, which of course was the voice of Herbert Eimert, who decided in the early 60s that he was now ready to record a record for the Deutsche Grammophon explaining how electronic music works. And it may be not too risky a hypothesis to say that he worked with a couple of these machines here, and this photograph was of course taken in the basement where they reside at the moment of the WDR studio for electronic music. So this is, if you will, like the pretty much most of the machinery that was part of the first phase of the WDR studio, which I pick as an example. It's of course a pretty obvious pick, but I'll do it. And when we think about the moment or the situation in which Aymat gave this lecture to a recording studio, it's I think an interesting point that probably everyone has some or lots of ideas about concerning a basically a pretty optimistic view on technology, maybe like in the middle of or just in between the nuclear bomb and the moon landing, that kind of thing maybe. So there's on the one hand a very specific bond to technology for like probably the whole society, but also on the other hand it is worth noting that the devices that we see and that for example Aymat worked with at the time were definitely not tailor-made for electronic music production. I mean, the studio technology was of course there was mixing desks and tape machines as like the basic means of production, but the actual processes of sound generation were pretty complex, as you would have to make a lot of decisions and probably make a lot of compromises. So yeah, but still we are in a specific moment of technology that is also interesting when you listen to like this very how do you say, this very strong and secure attitude within which at the time, like which was 10, 12, 13 years into the development of techniques, of studio techniques in the electronic studio in Cologne at least. And yeah, for me, that time, but that's probably a subjective view, seems to convey a sense of limitless supplies of future in some way. And maybe this is this has changed, and that is probably, but this is of course a difficult point to make, and but I think a point that should be discussed. Okay, I'll just very roughly sum up further developments of technology, remaining in the source of examples that I chose, this very same basement. So you have this as kind of a representation of what would succeed this kind of patchwork of instruments. So what you see here is, of course, a modular synthesizer that would allow composers and technicians to use or to work on a macro level, if you will, right? So not having to make every decision as a single decision, but also, of course, maybe changing the scales of freedom, because of course you buy a pre-structured kind of machine in a way. So you have like an integrated system that is also, as of now, like a tailor-made music technology item, which didn't exist before. And as we probably all know, this development accelerated faster and faster. Still yet, I couldn't resist from placing this image, which maybe some of you also know. This is like just as a representation of the possible personal hack to at any point, this is the anti-erase switch card box thing that Stockhausen put on the sequencer of the modular synthesizer to prevent anyone from deleting his formulae out of the sequencer. So, I mean, of course, with the exception of specific hacks, you would be, of course, involved in the technical development that takes place, and of course, there's processes of digitization of I don't know how you may want to call it softwareization. Does that exist? No.
It does now.
Ah, yeah, good. It's a strike of luck. And of course of all the situation we are in now. I mean, I'm just skipping, and I have one maybe a little bit more sad picture, which is also from just a few meters further. So this is the obsolescence picture, right? Even containing some exhibits of digitization, that's in Clavier in the corner, which wasn't actually part of the WDR studio, but
They had the money.
well, they had the money, yeah, and they and now they have the space to put it somewhere to wait until somebody decides what should be done, which is now 20 years, which is again, or which I think is an interesting turn in the story of obsolescence, because at this point we shift perspective and may even ask whether studios at all and studio practice might be subject to those processes. I don't know. This is just a hypothesis, but the history or the things or the discussions that are going around, for example, the WDR Studio for Electronic Music, are quite interesting because, as I just said, for pretty exactly 20 years, the actual studio has been closed, and there has been a second mode of existence that was triggered out of the idea of digitization of the whole studio output. So the studio has been existing in this basement for 20 years, and there are many ideas going around about maybe reviving it as an actual production unit, but I think that is exactly within this field that I was just trying to sketch. We have this obsolescence thing. I can skip this one now. I'm sorry, but within this field that is made up by electronic music technology and the possible or the future with 1 or 2 or 3 question marks. And I hope I left enough things open, pretty much anything, and I think that's just pretty vital chunks of the genre we are part of and we are interested in. So I hope we can discuss a couple of those points. Thanks.
So, the floor is open to questions. I've got about 10 things which I noted down there for us to discuss, but I'll pass everything over to you first of all for any first responses or questions. If not, then I'll jump in, because it seems to me that the most important question here is, what is the work? What is a work of music or a work of art? And when it comes to technology obsolescence, It's something that I think people more coming from the classical side of music making and composition in general are concerned about, and that our compatriots in the more popular forms of music are less concerned about, and that's because most often the work that popular musicians, at least those working in studios producing albums, what they're actually concerned with producing as a work of art is a recording. And so for them the question of obsolescence is perhaps one of interest. You know, you can reminisce about beautiful synthesizers that were available in the past and are rarer and rarer now, but the fact is these aren't pieces of equipment which are necessary in order to keep promulgating the works of art created with them, because they exist in the form of recording. Whereas coming from classical music, of course, we are most often concerned with, traditionally at least, the work of art in the form of a score, which needs interpretation. And so if you include any kind of technology in that, then you need that technology in order to recreate the musical work. And that's a big problem, not only of technology, but also of documentation and notation. You know, so they're the big challenges. I think there are though plenty of people working in improvisation in more experimental fields where the work of art is the performance and maybe a documentation recording as well. I don't know how people feel about that. There's no question in that, I suppose, from my side, but I put that out there.
It would of course open up the question whether, exactly where the work of art is to be located. Maybe it could also have a performative aspect, of course, within a studio context, for example. But
for sure.
Then I could boil down the question, or kind of answer that question in terms of what kind of art that we have. I mean, that's anything that is kind of fixed media that we can just, and you are literally, we can copy it without any quality. So there's the question of obsolescence is obsolete.
Yeah.
And we are concerned with questions of obsolescence in those kind of arts that need some kind of a performance, and the recording of it would just be a documentation of the performance, and the performance as such would be, what is that your point?
That was the point about improvisation, especially improvisation.
Because I just came in mind when you got all these nice examples that if you buy a license of Max MSP, you always get as a thing to get Stockhausen's Studio 2 as an implementation of Max MSP without all this possible technology. But if you buy a copy of a recent Max MSP and you've got some old Max MSP patch on your hard disk that was maybe written in Max 5 or something, you probably won't get it to run anymore.
It's a very nice example, exactly. Stockhausen, of course, never loved those versions because he thought it didn't sound nice, despite it's actually exactly doing what is written in the score. But he thought that all the envelopes should be, played by hand, for example.
Well, they would have been different envelopes.
Yeah.
Almost certainly, huh? But
yeah.
It came out of Max MSP, it would be different.
So
came out of his equipment.
Yeah, it's also the preface to the score of Studio 2, as far as I remember, also keeps the option or leaves a door open for the idea of realizing the piece as like not totally finishing up with the idea of fixed media. And I also would wonder if fixed media will remain fixed in the next couple of decades. I'm not totally sure.
That's a really tricky question, huh? Because it's an aesthetically differentiated question. You almost asking the question: will tape music continue to exist or not? And there are plenty of people who would say absolutely not, and plenty of people who say absolutely it will exist. It will continue to exist. And certainly in some form or other, it will continue to exist. The question is whether it exists in the form that we just experienced in the concert now, of just sound. or whether it's going to be accompanied by other things, like, for instance, film, which is also a form of fixed media. Maya?
Yeah, thinking about obsolescence. I'm also thinking about terms that we use, terms that go out of fashion. For example, electronic music, what do we put into that? Tape music, etc. And it makes me think of it now, for the first time, how we are going to deal with the term technology in the future.
Yeah.
Now we take that for granted, that is a remaining term, but that will be so wide and include so many aspects of everything that we use on daily level to very fine art. So
yeah, that goes back to Florian's question or point about the infinite future, I think, which you mentioned, you know, which young people tend to have in their lives all the time. As you get older, the future becomes less and less infinite. But we sort of all of us seem to have this idea that certain works we create will be available ad infinitum, and that even maybe the technology will be there. And you know, you produce a CD, you think, well, that's a CD that's by, in its nature, something that is duplicatable. It's not a single item, so that it's always going to be available. But as soon as you start to look for certain CDs that are maybe only 30 years old, you realize, hey, it's actually not there anymore. You know?
Exactly, yeah. Also, what you were saying about this idea of the recording or the record as a statement or as a work of art, for example, which is also, I think, it's become a pretty shaky context for this, right? Yeah, I mean, I could well imagine that nobody will understand albums as kind of a unit that makes sense in a couple of decades.
I think it's also very interesting that future is so slow. So, I mean, we're talking about technology, and you see this installation out there, it's like VR, virtual reality, and I think I'm old enough to know that, you know, in the 90s there was the first VR installation I was part of, and it was very, very expensive. You couldn't use it in any other context than in the industry, and now you can use it in the school. Students and work with it, and it's the same thing. It's really exactly the same thing. It's just like, you know, smaller and cheaper. And now you can start to use it as a tool to guide your perception, to find other ways with the students. And I think this is the most interesting thing about me talking about technology, that we all it's not new.
But
it's like an iteration.
But maybe also like the processes of development change. So at the moment, or the processes at the moment are the change in infrastructure or distribution of technology, I would say. You already mentioned that, of course, our lives have been steadily packed with technology to this day. And yeah, of course, maybe there is, I mean, maybe in the moment that Bayer wrote this text, something, some other logic of development had just taken place. By the way, I totally forgot the actual link between IMAT and Bayer that is maybe known to a couple of you. Of course, IMAT and Bayer together were part of the founding of the WDR studio. I forgot to mention this, I'm sorry. So Bayer, there would have been a happy ending actually, because Bayer was part of this, at the time, this future moment. Whatever that means.
Just before I turn to Maya,
yes.
Say, of course, everyone should take advantage of the opportunity to see Claudius's and to experience Claudius' installation, which is outside the whole duration of the 3 days. Some of you are already doing it, which is great to see, but don't think you can't go and interact with it. It's right there. Experience. Maya then has.
Just to add on to what we spoke about here, it's how we speak about technology that we also change our relationship to it, and how we find new terms for future technology. We don't know that yet, but it will definitely be something else than a big word, technology, with everything into. Language is so important here, because this is how we create focus on something, and how we create questions and discussions, and also knowledge about something by asking that. So this is super important. How we can talk about the future without having the terms of the future yet.
Yeah, I think that technological evolution is not something linear. There are some discoveries which were much more impactful to the society and to art, like the advent of electricity, which pretty much redefined everything. And coming back to Maya's, I think the next step, we might like it or not, the idea, but the next big step is that we will stop thinking about technology as being something outside of the body.
Exactly.
As soon as we will all have some implants and something which tracks our motion, breathing, heartbeat, etc., and that becomes part of our expressive body, that our division between me being the human and the technology is somewhere over here, and I can buy a human, etc. That separation will be blurred, and therefore also our separation between the human and the technology will be blurred.
I mean, we're also already experiencing that in the form of social media, right? Which some people tend to think of as a life outside of life, whereas in fact for a lot of people that is life already. You know, the social interactions which take place via social media channels, that is an integral part of their lives. It's not just something extra. Whether you like it or not.
I think we really need also to discuss perception, the human being, which is how is it relating to a copy of music. We're talking about copy CD, a copy, but now we have completely new tendencies in the art market, like NFTs, as tokens that you can really make a unique digital copy. Will this happen also for electronic music? Can it be a chance? It's artificial. I mean, these are also things which will need to be reflected.
I think it's a very interesting thing to look at the human being and the rooms we are going in the future. I think it was a very big aspect in the text from the 20s of the last century. The electronic music opens new rooms we never have been in before. But I think we are, with the new electronics and everything, with the digitalization, now with the corona and being alone in your room and getting in contact to other people just with digital media. And I think that's, for me, it's a very interesting thing how I change as a human being with the new media.
If we just pull the discussion a little bit in the direction of composers' work on a daily basis and also their works, I'd be interested, particularly amongst students, the younger people in the room, how much this is an issue for you when you're planning works. Are you planning for an infinite number of performances, or are you working on the single performance and are you concerned with just the recording of that, or the single performance and that's it? I mean, how do you see things? Is this even an issue for you? Someone be brave.
Well, maybe I first one. Great guys. I primarily compose for video games, and it's very project-based. And I think in the future these games will be discarded at some point because some other games will be more entertaining, or just the technology will change. But I think that's not focus to eternalize something, because I think culture is something that's always evolving, and it always, some things will be left behind and some new technology will come and some new techniques. And I think the point of creating is to be part of the process rather than to create something that's eternal and that will stay forever.
Yeah, that's it. The gaming aspect is really interesting because there'll be lots of people of all kinds of ages in this room, probably, that identify very strongly and have a real history with certain games and playing on computers. And most of those games will no longer be available. Some might be emulated and still possible, but they won't be available, which means that you rely entirely upon memory when speaking to peers who maybe had experiences with the same games and therefore you have a strong connection with them. And that's very different to just a small slice of time where people grew up with certain television programs, as children say, and can have exchanges with people of the same age who have those same experiences. We can still watch those things, we can still find those things. It's still out there, archived for us. Whereas in the game field, it's not. So that there's more obsolescence programmed in to those experiences. And that makes a big difference. Of course, when you go further back, there was nothing that was available technologically to grasp. All you could rely on was memory. It was that small slice of time of that generation where television was an important thing. Yeah.
I want to add to that. I think it's not only for games, but we have so much media and music that's coming and that's still being created, and things will get lost because there's too much. No one can go into the Google data and look for every music that was created. It's just enough. I think it's really important to let it go, and to make space for the new composers that will come afterwards, and to respect that.
Interesting.
So, Martha, thank you. I'm very fascinated, and really there is a point of connection between the eternal obsolescence and what Hans said about the fact that eternal and obsolescence need each other in a way. So the fact that we think the old guard think that eternal is something static, and so we are prone to have also the concept of obsolescence. But if we take that in a art as process, is pretty much connected with the body, and the technology will be implanted in the sense that if there is a connection on that term, it means that technology is something ever-changing, something that is organic, something that is not graspable.
Yeah.
And so the fact that art technology has the body is constantly changing.
Yeah.
And so the concept of eternal is not so clear and not so present anymore. I think that we are experiencing that change.
Yeah. But then there is just the general view of art, sort of a radical constructivist view of art, that the work never existed in totality, even when it was created by that particular composer, that the work is actually constructed by society as we progress through time. And our experience of Beethoven is nothing like even Beethoven's experience of Beethoven or his contemporaries' experience of Beethoven, because the historical practice develops the works, establishes certain references which we all understand, but also our relation to it and its historicity informs our appreciation, sometimes even before the work starts, which is really quite bizarre. There's a stature to certain people which changes your approach to how you listen and engage with the work of art. And that throws the whole idea of a permanent work of art straight out of the window.
Yeah, but I think it touches a very, very important point when we talk about the new world, that we extend our abilities, but we have to make a clear distinction. It is still our heartbeat which is driving us. You know that our heartbeat is the middle between fast and slow, and everyone can feel it when it sees a car. It's blinking like this. Everyone will agree this is slow. Why? Because it's less than 60 beats per minute. If it goes like this, we have in East Germany, the cars, a little bit more hectic, then we know it's fast. So there are parameters which are human. We should never forget when we deal with time, when we deal with psychology of hearing, listening, the spectra we have. This must always be a part of the discussion, what is eternal, what are values we can build something in. And then we start to differentiate, social, ethnic, whatever you have. I think we need to remember this pyramid because it's human. And when we talk eternal, we mean ourselves as we would be eternal, but it's of course not true. But we should remember this framework.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. question of what's concerned with perception.
Exactly.
The ability to perceive things is something that's not generally,
You cannot
generally
change.
extensively, you can't change an awful lot.
Yeah, I also agree with that, but I think there are also like factors that are changing. For instance, like our attention span, like you can already see because like social media and the mass of it, we're like losing our attention span. It's like getting shorter and shorter. And even if you see like Spotify, clips, music is also changing because of that. It's like before you had like a really long part where you could get into the music, and now it's like, okay, the first few seconds they have to be interesting, otherwise you would lose the interest. So I think there are some factors that are human that they won't change, but like these, I never guessed that like our attention span would change so much because of like those factors.
Is that elastic though? Isn't it something that can also change back?
Yes, we can.
There's no reason why it should continue to become shorter and shorter. We maybe speak maybe reasons. Huh?
Sorry to interrupt. I have commercial reasons.
Yeah,
purpose like this,
Yeah.
want to be successful and
Absolutely.
like manipulation of our abilities, that's to the extent it's possible, and I totally agree with you. It could be reversed.
It could be. If our values change, and our values probably will have to change if there's any future at all, then maybe things will.
Yeah, but if I'm composing today, I have to recognize that my listeners probably are linked and wired like this and expect something very, very exciting in the beginning, otherwise it will go away.
That's true. So, okay, please.
I think it's connected to more than just the commercial aspect. As an interested listener, there's so much to listen to. So you kind of get the feeling, oh, I have to listen to that, and then I have to listen to that. And it's so much because of globalization. There's so much different stuff. And with putting everything in fixed media, it will, over time, they have even more stuff to listen to. And I think that's also a part of the process to divide the attention to multiple stuff and not to focus on single things.
Right.
Yeah, first comment to that everything was bigger and bigger, and because the window is shorter and shorter. So there are many reactions to that already. You see a lot of people, they don't have smartphones anymore, if they're that privileged that they can live without it. And the most popular TV program in Norway was slow television, where they were just filming. They did many versions of it. First they were just filming in the Coastal Express, just for a week, just going up along the coastal border, and that was it. And that was the most popular program. And then they did a similar thing with the train, these slow trains across Norway. So there is an urge for that to return in a way, or to cope with both. And then I was thinking about what you said about the art that is created in the gaming world, for example. And I think that is quite beautiful. It's the same that we experience when we perform, that you actually have to be there. It's not about documenting it, because you have to be present. It's this beauty of sort of vanity, of when something is lost. So, and I think that also opens up for the aspect of the artist not being that high up on a pedestal anymore. In our society now, we also see that artists share work, they collaborate when creating something, having different backgrounds, feeding into the work becomes more important than the artist. And that makes the work also more vulnerable to eternity. But it's the beauty of that as well.
Well, that speaks immediately to the work, the theoretical work.
When we are sharing things through our own technology, it makes us more part of one human body, rather than separate individuals.
Yeah, and that does speak to the work of Christopher Small, who uses music as a verb and speaks of musicking in order to highlight the fact that music is something that's made, is an activity, whether you're the listener or the performer. as opposed to music, the noun, which is something that exists outside of the human being almost. It's maybe a little bit of a forced use of the word or the creation of a word, but it does highlight something very important, and that's something which we all can appreciate after being in lockdown for so long, that music is a social activity. That can't be ignored and should not be ignored, no matter how much music to an extent is pushed into a personal listening experience through listening on mobile phones or similar such devices. I would suggest we've got about 7 or 8 minutes break till the next talk, and there's probably new nibbles and drinks, so maybe we should break there. Unless someone's got something very urgent to say.
I feel.
Do.
Yeah, I cannot stop it. And it's so important what you just said, this music thing, this an ongoing activity, and I think we need to open our mind to all these possibilities, because we have also in speaking, we are chatting, we are having a conversation, but there's also some rhetoric, well-done stuff, which is like something which all people are listening to, like someone's on stage and doing something. So we have all these different kinds of communication, and it's great that we can do it with music.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Florian. In the end, you didn't actually have to speak so much. You set us well in motion. Thank you very much.